Well, my name is Pamela Lewerenz, and I am known as the Brick Wall Coach, and I am being joined today by Annette Adamska. And welcome, Annette.
Thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be here.
I am excited to have you here with me today. So we are going to just, learn a little bit about who you are, what your business is all about, and all that good stuff. We're gonna dive in a little bit even behind your business. So why don't you start off by, I've already introduced you, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you live, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I am Annette Adamska, and I'm the founder of Back Up Your Life and Back Up Your Business. And I live in Durham, North Carolina, a former Brooklynite of New York, but relocated here a few years ago. And I help people with that kind of planning, preparation, and peace of mind, either in their lives and also in their businesses.
Awesome. Awesome. So what made you want to start a business to begin with?
Oh, well, I realized that in the past, I actually started my career as a stage manager working off-Broadway professionally. And so realizing after the fact that that's very entrepreneurial because you're job to job, right? There's not necessarily security, job, depending on how you were working. So realizing that I was living the entrepreneurial life before I really knew I was. And I had a little bit of a stint with that normal job and having crazy things like benefits. You're like, what does this mean? And it was like my late 20s. And then I wanted more and I wasn't able to grow where I was and then transitioned into professional organizing. And that then kind of led organically to what I was doing now. So it's this whole thing of, it's not necessarily what I originally set out to do or had thought about, but it's really great to be able to really focus on making sure that it's what I do well and being able to help other people in areas that they may not be as strong in. And that's okay, right? We all have our unique strengths and really being able to focus on mine and realizing I feel that we always forget with our zone of genius, you don't know what you're good at because it's just easy to you. And this whole idea of when work doesn't feel like work because it does come easily to you, but you have this notion that things have to be hard and they actually don't have to be as hard as you think they need to be. So
absolutely. Absolutely. And isn't that funny that sometimes when you start a business, it turns out to take these twists and turns. So it's not absolutely where you thought you were going to end up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and what's really funny now too, I'm also offering for other services like integrator services. So really I call it stage managing your small business. So it's really funny for me how I started my career however many years ago and I'm kind of ending back where I started, but in the best possible way. And all the things you learn. And it's just really funny how what you knew now versus, 13 or 14 years ago. So that's been a really interesting realization for me, but also really great because I have all this different experience between in work and in life. And it really informs what I do and then how I can help people who are really good at the ideas and not so good at implementing it and laying out that plan. And that's where one of my strengths is. So being able to do that for people, and I say it's, keeping CEOs in their zone of genius because they're really good at what they do, right? But if you're growing a team and you have a really flat organizational structure, all of a sudden you need someone to kind of translate that mission and make sure everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing.
Right, right. Yeah. Oh, I love how you bring that experience into it because I think that's really, really what it's all about. It's the experiences of everybody who's involved in it, all at different levels.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about exactly what your business does and how it helps people?
Yeah, so talking about for Back Up Your Life and Back Up Your Business, really helping people get all the information that is in their brain and in all the other places in one spot, right? So in the end, I really like to think about we all end up being brain trusts, right? Whether it be personally in our lives or also within our businesses, especially.
Yeah.
So I can tell you a little bit about how Back Up Your Life came to be and then how Back Up Your Business came from that, if that's helpful.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great.
So for Back Up Your Life, we had moved from Brooklyn, we moved to Durham. And then a few weeks after that, my mom actually had a catastrophic accident while traveling overseas. And then she passed away a few months after that. So that put my whole life upside down. I pretty much left my spouse and North Carolina for many months and attending to her. And I loved my mother, but she had nothing prepared. She had nothing documented, stored, or shared. And I had asked her for many.
Nothing planned out.
No. I mean, she had a notebook that had passwords, but the passwords were in code that only she could decipher, right?
Yep.
So all of a sudden, and luckily after her accident, she was cognitively fine at that time. So it was great. So she was just literally spouting off all this information, right? This is what gets paid on this date. This is how money moves to here. This is what this password means. So she had it all, but she didn't have it in a place. So I was very fortunate, despite what did happen, I was able to get a lot of information from her, but there are also other things I didn't have and weren't in place, such as, will, power of attorney, all of those things that just can make life a lot easier, especially when something really unexpected happens. And then after my mom passed, I really just realized there are all of these ways that and there are different, programs and things out there to help people get this information documented, stored, and shared. But what I realized was missing was this bridge and to help people get from point A to point B. And that's what I was really trying to be able to help and use my story and tell people, like, this is why this is important. And in the end, to just be able to communicate your values and what's important to you is really, for me, the biggest piece. And there are also really different ways of doing it, right? There are some people I've done this where pretty much everything's online and they're okay with that. And there are other people that may not be the case. And that's also okay, right? So it's all about finding your way in. And unfortunately, we live in a very death-denying culture, and these conversations aren't had. Right. But within that process of making Back Up Your Life, I realized that for myself as a small business owner, and also for a lot of my friends and clients and people who are small business owners, who have, I call it the pie of life. And if you are like a W-2 employee, you kind of have it's like a little piece, right? Just like, who's your supervisor, where's, some information. If you're a business owner, all of a sudden that is a really big chunk of that pie, right? And I think for a lot of business owners, that's what they think of. And that's what they know. And that's a lot of times what they worry about is their business and all this information. So I realized there's a whole other group that could even be really digging down into the business part of it. So I use the same exact framework and same exact process for Back Up Your Life, but I just use it for Back Up Your Business and really targeting the business owners and just that information. So I've had people worked with folks who are solopreneurs, from people who are, attorneys, CPAs, people who own a craft store and a bakery, and different service providers, to people who have, a software company with 14 employees. So there's really this great variety of people that this can really fit in some way, shape, or form for any business. And I really just think taking a look at things in a different way. And I know people sometimes know they need to do it, but they don't know how. And that's what some of the things that I've kind of helped people figure out is how to make it work, and then also how to make it work for them specifically. Because I don't think, just like when I was in organizing, one size does not fit all. And what can be a great solution for one person may not be the best for the other. So I have a place to start, but then really getting to know the client and what's important to them and their comfort level, then you can build out a plan that really works for them and their company.
And I would think, just going back to what you said in the beginning, I would think that it's a difficult conversation for people to have with someone else, but it's also really difficult to think about your life and how something may happen to you and why it's important to have this in place. I think sometimes we don't give ourselves permission to think outside the box like that. We're just more or less going about day to day, everything's good, that's not going to happen to us, but it could.
Well, and that's the thing too, right? If you asked me 5 years ago what would have happened to me in 2015 if happened, that wasn't even in my mind, right? And then it doesn't happen until it does. So I'm an example of that. And also, I think what you also bring up in a really interesting way of kind of thinking outside the box, there are times that people think very directly, they've thought about things, but only in one certain path. And they haven't thought of really all the possibilities that could happen. So for example, I sometimes talk to people and they're like, Annette, I'm fine. Everything someone needs is on my computer. And I'm like, that's great. But do they have your password? Well, A, can they find it? And B, can they get in?
Yeah.
And C, is it organized in a way that anyone else can make sense of it? And that's like a whole other,
Yes.
a whole other thing.
Yes.
But people just think, oh, someone can find X and they'll be able to do Y. And that's not necessarily the case. And that's okay, but just to really know and to think through these different pieces and what that means for them. And how can they really set themselves up for success? And for me, it really comes down to how can you live your everyday life with more ease? Because life is hard. And sometimes there are all these things coming at us all the time of how do you not have to be, you know, that brain trust. And also to remember that, you know, a colleague of mine has this great saying that I've kind of distilled down to, your brain is for thinking and not for remembering. And we put this pressure on ourselves that we have to remember and be able to like roll all these facts off of our tongue. We don't have to do that. Like, I don't know my EIN off the top of my head, and that's fine, but I know exactly where to find it.
Yeah.
And the value of those trusted systems, because
and that is key. That is key. And just because you know everything, where it is and how it operates, it doesn't mean that somebody else is going to come in and think just like you and know that this is the first step, this is the second step, unless that's all written down somewhere.
Well, and also, so I just had a in-person boot camp that ended yesterday, and you know, one of the attendees is a lawyer, right? So they're, especially for people, you know, lawyers had financial planners, so they have other certain more strict regulations about things, and they really, which I completely and utterly respect. So just because you're doing this doesn't mean you have to all of a sudden give everyone all the information, right? I talk about it as the treasure map. Like, if something happens to me, this is the first place you go to get this information to do step one. Right. And then you can do step two. So that way people sometimes think like, I have to let someone in and they'll know everything. Not necessarily.
No.
I mean, if you want to, that's fine. And even with the blueprint I use, like, you're giving a lot of that information and giving that guidance for someone, right? Like, you're pointing to where things are. First, like, for example, I have a section like called Show Me the Money, right? Because financials and how you get money in your business is really big. So like, what bank do you use and what type of accounts do you have? Nowhere do I say to put any of your account information. That's not appropriate. But with so many banking opportunities, you know, we have online banking, local credit unions. How does someone even know where to start? So you're just being able to give them that focus and giving them, leaving those breadcrumbs so they know where to go to, and they aren't just sitting in the middle of a home office saying, where is anything?
Exactly. So why don't you walk us through the ways that somebody could work with you? What does that look like? Let's say I come to you and I say, I have absolutely nothing in place. Mm-hmm. My passwords are written, you know, in a notebook. Mm-hmm. And other than that, that's it. Everything's up here in my head. So how can you help me?
Yeah. So I work one-on-one with business owners and entrepreneurs, and I work with people locally. I also, through the wonders of things like Zoom here, I'm able to work virtually with clients, and that's been really fantastic. For anyone who is local in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina, I also offer in-person boot camps to help people get started and work on their plans. Those happen about every quarter. And I'm also really excited to be launching so I've created the Back Up Your Business Blueprint, which is really helping people with that guide for them to really give them that information. And so it's the how, right? You might think you might want to do it, but you don't know where to start. It can be that place to help you start. So I will be releasing that again in April. So I'm like, what month is it?
I know. Yep, it's February.
February 12th, 2019, and that will be released next month in March. So if anyone's interested in that, please feel free to reach out to me or shoot me your email, and I'm happy to give you a notification and the first glimpse when it's live again. But those are the three buckets that I have for people to work with me and for Back Up Your Business.
Perfect. So these in-person boot camps that you have, are they done at a location of yours, or do you go out to someone's business or home? How is that?
Yes. So right now I'm holding them in a co-working space. So it's a place that is pretty, like location wise, it's when you're trying to serve a larger area, how can it be easy for people to get to, again, it's all about removing those barriers and how do you make things easier. So I have rented a room there. So we are in person and showing up live there for 2 half-day sessions. So the first day is really understanding the Back Up Your Business framework and understanding the process and the why and doing some of the starting. And then the second day is really that implementation time, because what's so interesting as business owners, right? We're, not really working on the business. We're always in it and in the weeds. So taking that CEO time, and for some people, they're really good at implementing on their own. But for other people, they really need that accountability, and then being able to be there to, troubleshoot and spot coach just if there's something that they can't figure out, or making sure that something's working for them specifically for their business. And even, for example, there were a few people who wanted to use LastPass or use LastPass better. So I ended up doing a quick mini training during the time, so that way everyone could leverage this password manager, which can be a really great tool to use, but they could then use it in the best way possible for them. So
Right.
It's a really,
right. Well, for instance, I use LastPass, and the reason that I started using it is because my husband was forever saying to me, what's the password to get into the bank? Or did you change this thing? And I'm thinking, okay, I can't, first of all, you can't keep it all in your head. So you have to put it somewhere, and really putting it on paper, unless you're keeping it in like a strong box, kind of defeats the purpose, because then your password could be floating out there to anybody. So I stumbled across this LastPass and started using it just for our things. And then, of course, as I went into business, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to add a folder and put all that stuff in there, because it's phenomenal the amount of passwords there are.
It's incredible. You go and
everything.
I have hundreds in my vault, and some things you just do like one time. Sometimes it's just really incredible. You buy one thing off of one site once, and all of a sudden you have a whole account there.
Yeah.
And I love how, you used it. It's funny. I actually initially used it because my husband was using it. I joke that he's my chief technology officer for the business, but he's a software developer, and he's like, hey, we're doing this to be able to share that information. I mean, mainly to share the Netflix password, but but there are things like that from the important. So the fact that we use it is a really great tool. So for all of our bills, we keep our, known frequent flyer numbers in there. If we need to book tickets of like another airline, we have TSA pre-check, right? Instead of going back and forth, like, what's that information?
Yeah.
We both have access to this shared folder. And it's just, again, going back to living your everyday life more easily and efficiently.
Right, exactly. And you don't have to remember to pick up that little notebook that may have certain passwords in it if you're not at home. If you're somewhere else and you need to get access to it, that's what used to aggravate me as well. Like, I would be totally somewhere else and I'm like, oh man, I just can't remember the password. Then you get either locked out of the account or you need to, notify them. Can you please get this for me? And there goes 2 hours of your life.
And I also know a lot of people who are like, oh, well, I have a system, right? I do that. And that can be, that's fine. But then if someone else figures out the system, then they have your system. And B, the thing that I really do love for things like LastPass is you can create like a really ridiculous password. Like I think for my email provider, for my business account, it's like a 60 character password. And I think you can make things up to 100 characters. And you can select, you want it uppercase, lowercase, special symbol, or having numbers in it. So and the fact that you can then change things easily. So maybe something you want to make sure is higher security, you can go in and every 3 months change that.
Yeah.
Right? And being able to then give that extra layer and to know, and sometimes people say, oh, security, if I want to have it written down. But I mean, someone can break into your home and get that information too. So I think it's really being mindful when you are, as we live in this digital age, how can you be a educated consumer, right? And knowing what you're clicking on.
Yeah.
And also leveraging things like, because, LastPass and other things, like their only job is to keep your information secure. And I have a lot of other jobs. So I like to be able to delegate that piece of things, right? And then just to know that if you ever need something, and you have to remember it, because again, like it just comes back to your brain is for thinking, and not for remembering, because it's too much. And how can you have a secure password that you remember? What did I make a letter? What's a number? What's a dollar sign instead of an S? It's just a lot.
I know, it's a lot. It's a lot. Although I have to say, I've worked with clients in the past that totally don't want anything really online because they're just frightened of what could happen. I mean, we've all heard the horrible things where people have hacked into your, bank accounts or whatever's going on. So they want to take most of their stuff offline if they can and save it. So do you have a method or a way that you work with clients that are a little bit more shy about using the online?
Yeah, there's certain ways to use things, and then to be able to have things either, stored on an external hard drive that you don't have plugged into the internet many of the time. So there are ways to kind of do the workarounds, but then I tell them like, hey, this is how you have to make sure to have this information replicated, because it's only one access point. So how do people know where to find that? What happens if something happens to that piece? And for me, it's really important. I want to meet my client where they are. I'm not going to tell them what to do. I just want them to know what their options are, and we can find the best solution that works for them and their comfort level. And also something that I recommend anyone to do, and especially with all these things with like bank accounts and those really, even, for your email accounts, because people can wreak havoc if they get into your email, using dual factor authentication. So if you log in, you then either receive an email or a text message that then gives a 4 to 6 digit PIN so that you can then get in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that way,
it is an extra step, but it's ensuring your safety. So it's a lot better than.
And it's that whole thing of like, what's important to you, right? Yeah. And if you're trying to be as secure as possible and trying to be mindful, because it's hard. We're not going to become less entrenched online, right? Like,
absolutely. It's going this way.
It's going the other direction. Like I know there was just, I was listening to a radio station the other day, and they were talking about how, problems in Sweden because they're moving to everything being cashless. Right. But what happens to other populations who may not have access to a card, right? So just these things that we now have to think about in a different way. And what does that mean? So again, being educated and understanding it, really diving in and understanding, okay, what does, we've been talking about LastPass. I'll use LastPass. What are their security measures? What will they do for me, right? So that way you can read all that information. They have to put that stuff out there. So that way you know what that means. And then what are the places you put extra layers of protection for yourself. And that's where I love the dual factor authentication, because it just adds an extra layer of protection for yourself. And that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It is. So who is your ideal client? Who would you say your ideal client is?
Yeah, so I have, as I mentioned, worked with a lot of different folks, from people who have brick and mortar to service providers. Being a service provider, I love working with service providers, whether they be solopreneur or maybe they have, a large and a growing team. But really, anyone who owns a business can, I think, really get value out of taking that time and space to back up your business. And the one thing I also like to remind people is that they don't necessarily have to be the one to do it. If you have a team or if you have a virtual assistant, I can work with other people on your team to get that information, right? If you're too stressed or you can't even imagine what that would mean, we could have a conversation so you know the basis and what this can look like. But if you need someone else to implement it, that's fine. I am all about delegation. I think it's really key.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think when you go out and do those boot camps, I would think that sometimes not just the business owner, but, the partner or the admin assistant or whoever would come, like a team of people.
Yeah. And I'm also looking into doing for businesses, if they want, I can come into their team to let everyone know on the team know, because people think about what are the big things in the business. But if you have a team and you have whether they be, if you have employees, what about their systems and processes? Because your employee has information in their head that you don't know. I can guarantee it. So how do you make sure that you have the really important things that they're, documented, stored, and shared? And I use those phrases a lot, since that's really the framework that I work in with my clients. And what's interesting is that the fact that people think you want to start with document, but you actually want to figure out how you're storing and who you're sharing it with first. because once you have those two pieces done, then you can document it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes absolute sense.
But
That
it's
makes
not the thing you would think about when you first approach it. You're, let me just get this information out. Like, no. Take a step back. You have to look at the whole picture first before you kind of get, like, throw yourself in the middle of it and get through the weeds.
Yeah. Oh, good. Good. What else did you want to share with us? A way to connect with you or anything else that we didn't talk about today that you just want to get out to people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that's great that we talked a little bit about was the fact that you can really leverage password managers is a great way to keep information, right? Like, especially there's a note section. So you can put things like, what are your security questions? Or if it's an automatic payment, when does that automatic payment happen? Does it get charged to a credit card or does it come from your bank, from your business checking account? So there are a lot of things that you can have and maybe use now to help leverage those pieces. And of course, I always love connecting with people on LinkedIn. You can find me, Annette Adamska. And also there's a Facebook page. I'm also on Instagram, but really just love connecting with folks in any realm and being able to do things like, kind of getting out the word and letting people know that this even exists. Because I think people think about it. They're like, oh, I should do that.
Yeah. And
then it's interesting to actually take the time to do it. And that's the one thing I always tell people, especially those who, come to my boot camp or any of the talks that I do locally, is you are giving me your most valuable resource, and that is your time. And I do not take that lightly. So how can we get to it, make sure you have what you need, and then really set you up for success? Because we all have so much happening in our world and in our life. So how can we get to the good stuff, right? Because that's really what I want people to do, is to be able to live their lives and really enjoy it, their personal lives, their business lives, but then really be prepared no matter what life throws their way. So I have a little saying, which is, if life throws you a curveball, can you catch it with grace instead of being hit in the face?
Oh, I like that. I like that. Well, I was going to say, you offer discovery calls.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So somebody could set up a discovery call with you, and then you can pretty much tell them the time that it's going to take depending on, what areas they really want to go into.
Exactly. So you can go to letsbackupyourlife.com or letsbackupyourbusiness.com, and you can click on scheduling a discovery call. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it. And if you just are interested or want to know more or are not sure if this is something that you need, I'm very transparent and let people know what I do and how I do it, and really want to work with people who like making sure that we're a good fit, right? Because I know, and that's okay. And that's the great thing about, being a business owner, is that I can serve a lot of people, but making sure that I serve the people that I can resonate with the most. And
absolutely,
I'm not everyone's cup of tea. And that's totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the links in, ways for people to connect with you right here in all the comment section. And I want to thank you for joining me today. It has been amazing. I've learned a lot. I think it's great information. It's definitely something everybody, no matter if you own a business or not, should really start thinking about, because these are really important things. These are, when you're listing out, hey, these are the steps you need to take to be set up. You really think about these steps.
Well, and the problem is, if you look at that, like Stephen Covey has the 4 quadrants and things that it's important, but it's not urgent.
Yeah.
And the issue is when it becomes urgent, then a lot of times it's too late to really get the benefits, because, having gone through the loss of a parent, nothing makes grief any better, but there are things that can make it a lot worse. And I have learned what those things are, and I try to help my clients avoid them.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and looking forward to connecting with your community more.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.